Umalusi, the Council for Quality Assurance in General and Further Education and Training, is concerned about the recent protest actions in some parts of the country. This resulted in some candidates either missing the National Senior Certificate examination or writing it later than originally scheduled. In the Northwest Province, arrangements had to be made for approximately 460 candidates to be compensated for the time lost. More than 50 candidates in Gauteng could not write the examination due to community protests. In Mpumalanga, approximately 1,130 candidates were prevented from accessing their examination centers. Let's now bring in the Chief Executive Officer at Umalusi, Dr. Mafu Rakometsi, on Zoom on the way forward for those who were prevented from writing these exams. And Dr. Rakometsi, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you, Desiree.
You usually have to answer questions at the end of an examination, but this year is quite different because of these protests. What have been some of the ramifications of the students who have not written their exams or who have written it a bit later than scheduled?
This phenomenon is very traumatic to our students in that you'd all know that when somebody has prepared himself to write an examination, it is a moment that is looking forward to. For that to be postponed to a later date in circumstances where a student does not have control over, it is quite frustrating and traumatic. What has happened there is that in the Northwest, students had to be given extra time because the roads were blocked as they were trying to access their examination centers. In Mpumalanga, a place called Emalahleni, Wheatbank, what happened is that there were community protests because of load shedding. There's no electricity in that community, so we are told, and more than 1,000 learners were not able to write their mathematics paper.
So is there concern that these delays or not writing the exams could impact the overall outcome of matric results this year? What have you as Umalusi done as a means of damage control?
We've got mechanisms in place to ameliorate such situations. What we do is that with every paper that is written, there is always a backup paper. In the case of the Northwest, the students only had to be given extra time for them to complete their examinations. In the case of Mpumalanga, what is going to happen is that the students are going to be given another date during which they are going to be writing, and the Department of Basic Education is going to be announcing that date. That is costly in that those papers don't come cheap. The initial papers would have been duplicated for the students. The examiners would have been paid, the moderators, both internal and external. Now, it would mean that when we use the backup paper, that backup paper is no more available for future use. So these are very costly for the department and for Umalusi.
But we're talking about protests right now. There are other concerns, such as outages, electricity outages, that also prevent students from writing. There's also been the premature release of 2 question papers, namely Physical Science 2 and the Life Sciences papers. What's the way forward here?
What has happened is that all the subjects that were written that needed electricity were not adversely affected. At the time when computer applications technology was written and information technology IT were written, there was no problem. The only problem that happened is that about 50 learners, when they were trying to upload their answers, the computers blew up. In that case, it is something that was beyond the school and beyond the department, so they left to rewrite. The issue of the papers that were released prematurely affects the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, which is an independent assessment body. The assessment body released the papers erroneously before time. That is, the paper that was supposed to be written today was released to Umalusi on Friday. And another paper that was supposed to be written on the 18th, and that is the Life Sciences paper, was also released on Friday. So immediately the paper is released in that way, we say it is compromised. And there is no way in which you can say the paper still has integrity. In those instances with the Sakai, which is an independent assessment body, we have instructed them to make the learners to write the backup papers. So those papers that were released last week, we say they are compromised.
So there was also this situation that blew up last week where post-writing, students were complaining about a particular question in a maths paper that everybody was concurring was unanswerable. And some of the responses coming out of the Department of Basic Education was they were going to ask Umalusi to either mark down or mark up this particular question depending on whether on how far the impact went. How have you engaged with this particular problem?
That has happened. A symbol was missing in the question paper. We are still investigating what happened because the paper goes through numerous hands, the examiners, the internal moderators, and the external moderators of Umalusi. How that problem was not detected when it was the question paper was dealt with by 3 independent panels, which still do not know. It could have happened at the point of printing. That the symbol went missing. So the learners were thrown off by about 7 marks. So what we're going to do is that during the memorandum discussions, there'll be a clear determination as to what is going to happen, whether those 7 marks are going to be removed from the total or not. So that then the learners ultimately cannot be disadvantaged by that error that happened in the paper. We're going to ensure that learners are not disadvantaged by that error. And beyond the memorandum discussions, after the markers would have decided whether to include the 7 marks or to exclude it, we are still going to have a standardization process during which we are going to look at things that crept into the paper that could have disadvantaged learners. And in this case, it is this error that happened in the mathematics paper.
And just overall, are we looking at a calmer situation right now? Or is there a need to be more concerned about these protests? Are you looking at measures of security, perhaps?
Yes, when we appeal to the members of the South African public to desist from such practices, they are very sympathetic. The South African adult population respects education because they understand the value thereof. So we have made an appeal throughout the weekend. The department made an appeal last week that people should desist from using community protests, and examinations to leverage whatever they are looking for. And we are hopeful that South Africans, being who they are going to cooperate and they are going to stop the practice of community protest at this delicate time when our children are writing examinations.
And also, you as Umalusi have urged assessment bodies and stakeholders to ensure smooth running of the 2022 exams. Are we seeing a difference?
Indeed, the efforts that are made by the Department of Basic Education and the different private assessment bodies are very good. It is very encouraging. It is heartwarming to see how hard the colleagues are working. At this time when examinations are written, the people who run examinations at national level, provincial level, district level, and school level, they don't sleep. They sleep very late. They work long hours. They start very early in the morning with the distribution of the paper. There are a lot of sacrifices. And on the side of Umalusi, you must say, we are truly, truly impressed with the manner in which these colleagues are sacrificing and in the manner in which they are running examinations.
Dr. Rakometsi, thank you so much for your time this morning. That was Umalusi Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Mafu Rakometsi, talking to us about the recent protest actions in some parts of the country, which resulted in some candidates either missing the National Senior Certificate examination or writing it later than originally scheduled.